culture. You'd think that would be the perfect recipe for unity. So how did a country with so much in common manage to tear itself apart so completely? Just look at this contrast. It tells you everything you need to know. On the left, you've got Mogadishu in the 1960s, the gold star of Africa, a vibrant, democratic capital full of promise. And on the right, the very same city in the 1990s, now a synonym for anarchy and absolute chaos. To really get how this happened, we've got to go back to the very first domino that started this whole chain reaction.
And that first domino was a military coup, one that promised to fix all the nation's problems, but instead it ended up planting the seeds of its own destruction.
So after years of messy political infighting in the young democracy, this guy, General Siad Barre, steps in and basically presents himself as the solution. He promised stability, he promised progress, and this is the important part, he promised an end to all the clan-based politics that he said were holding the country back. So his official ideology, the one he sold to the public, was called scientific socialism. Now, on paper, this was all about building a modern, totally unified Somalia. The message was simple, right? Your loyalty is to the state, not to your clan. In fact, clanism was officially outlawed. He called it an enemy of the people. Okay, but here's where it all gets complicated. Look at the huge disconnect between what he said and what he actually did. Publicly, he's screaming bury clanism, but behind the scenes, he was weaponizing it. He systematically favored his own clan, the Marahan, and then he built this power-sharing alliance with two other clans. They called it the Mod Alliance. So while he was telling everyone else to forget their clan, he was using his own to control the military, the government, the whole shebang. And this left other major clans like the Isek and the Hawiye feeling completely shut out and powerless. This was the fatal contradiction at the heart of his rule.
And for a while, this fragile system kind of held together. But then Barre made a single, catastrophic gamble that would basically light a match to the whole thing and accelerate the country's collapse.
This gamble was all wrapped up in this really powerful nationalist dream, the idea of creating a greater Somalia. The goal was to unite all ethnic Somalis under one flag, including those living in the Ogaden region of neighboring Ethiopia. It was a super popular cause, but it would lead to an absolutely devastating war. And man, you can see on this timeline just how fast it all fell apart. In 1977, the invasion starts off as a massive success. The Somali army is rolling. But then the unthinkable happens. Somalia's main superpower ally, the Soviet Union, suddenly switches sides and starts pouring weapons and support into Ethiopia. The tables turned almost overnight. By late 1978, the Somali army, once seen as this unbeatable force, was just utterly crushed. The fallout from this was total. The army wasn't just defeated, it was humiliated and fractured. The national economy was left in ruins. The country was suddenly flooded with weapons from the war. And you had this deep, bitter resentment against Barre, the guy who led them into this disaster. His image as this strong, invincible leader was just gone. And that resentment, it didn't just bubble under the surface, it exploded into action. Those marginalized clans, the ones who had been suffering under Barre for years, they saw his weakness, they saw their chance, and they started to organize, to arm themselves, and to form rebel movements with one goal: overthrow the regime. So the war didn't just weaken the state, it actually created its own armed opposition. And this brings us to the final brutal phase of the collapse. With his back against the wall, Barre didn't try to make peace or reform the system. No, he chose violence.
The regime unleashed this wave of pure terror, especially targeting the Isaac clan up in the north, who were the backbone of the biggest rebel group. We're not just talking about a crackdown here. This was state-sanctioned slaughter. His own air force bombed cities like Hargeisa into rubble. And of course, all this brutality did was create more rebels and guarantee that his regime would end in violence.
The end, when it came fast. Rebel groups from all sides closed in on the capital. In January 1991, Siad Barre fled. And just like that, his 21-year dictatorship was over. But, and this is the most critical moment of the whole story, there was no plan for what came next. The rebels who had united to kick Barre out, that was the only thing they agreed on. The second he was gone, their alliance completely shattered, and they immediately turned their guns on each other to fight for control of the ruins. So the state didn't just change hands, it evaporated. It completely ceased to exist. And what followed was just a descent into an absolute void. With no government, no police, no army, The country was just carved up by different clan-based militias led by warlords. Every single state institution, hospitals, schools, you name it, vanished. This pure chaos triggered a horrific famine and a massive refugee crisis as hundreds of thousands of people tried to flee the violence. And the long-term consequences of this collapse are things we've all heard about, right? The era of the warlords, the terrible famine that led to that ill-fated US and UN intervention, the one made famous by Black Hawk Down, the explosion of piracy off the coast, and eventually the rise of extremist groups like Al-Shabaab who just thrived in that power vacuum. Every single one of these is a direct result of the state completely disappearing. So, in the end, the collapse of Somalia was a tragic chain reaction. A dictator who played a dangerous double game with clan politics, a catastrophic war that shattered the nation's pride in its army, and a power vacuum that just swallowed everything whole. It leaves us with this incredibly difficult and profound question: once a nation has completely unraveled, what on earth does it take to build it back from nothing?
Okay, so I want you to picture two photographs, right, sitting side by side on a desk. In the first one, the colors they're faded, that sort of vintage Kodachrome look. It's the late 1960s.
Right.
You're looking at this coastline, and the city is it's breathtaking. Whitewashed Art Deco buildings gleaming in the sun.
I know the exact images you're talking about.
Wide boulevards, palm trees, cafes filled with people in these sharp battalion suits and dresses. It looks so cosmopolitan, so hopeful.
And this is Mogadishu, Somalia. They used to call it the Pearl of the Indian Ocean.
Exactly. The pearl. It really captures that feeling, that moment of post-independence optimism that was sweeping across Africa.
The feeling that the future was just wide open.
Right. But then you slide your eyes over to the second photo.
And it's a completely different world.
It's the early 1990s, same city, same streets, but it looks like, I don't know, the surface of the moon.
Yeah.
The buildings are just concrete skeletons chewed up by artillery. You've got technicals, those pickup trucks with anti-aircraft guns welded on the back.
And the people. The suffering is just etched on their faces. It's the imagery of Black Hawk Down.
It's the image most of the world has of Somalia today. And it is such a jarring, almost impossible contrast.
To go from the gold star to complete ruin in a single generation.
And that's the mystery we're really trying to solve today. How does that happen? And I don't just mean a war started.
No, it's deeper than that.
I mean, how does a nation that was actually unique in Africa, culturally unified, same language, same religion, not carved up by colonial borders like so many others, how does that nation descend into such complete catastrophic state failure?
That is the central question. And to get at it, we're looking at a deep dive titled The Unraveling. It's this narrative history that traces the collapse step by step.
And what's wild is that the source makes it clear this wasn't just bad luck.
Not at all. It wasn't just a drought or something. It was a very specific chain reaction.
It reads like a Greek tragedy. You can just see the dominoes lining up one by one.
That's a great way to put it. You have a military coup, a dictatorship promising utopia, a massive geopolitical betrayal, and then a power vacuum that nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, was prepared to fill.
So let's go back to that first photo, the Pearl of the Indian Ocean. The source mentions that from 1960 to 1969, Somalia was a democracy.
It was.
And on paper, it looked great. But the notes suggest that even then, the foundation was cracking.
It was, yeah. We have to be careful not to romanticize it too much. Yes, it was a parliamentary democracy, but it was becoming incredibly chaotic. You had dozens of political parties.
And they were all based on clans, right? Not ideology.
For almost all of them, which we should probably pause on that word, clan. Because for a Western listener, that might just sound like extended family.
But it's so much more than that in the Somali context.
Oh, absolutely. It's fundamental. You have to imagine in that harsh environment, historically, you couldn't rely on a state to save you if your crop failed or someone stole your camels.
You relied on your kinship group.
Exactly. Your clan is your social security, your insurance policy, and your army all rolled into one. It is your primary identity.
So in the 60s, politics just became a way for these clans to fight over the national pie.
Pretty much. Corruption was rampant. The system was gridlocked. People were getting frustrated. They felt democracy wasn't delivering development. It was just delivering arguments.
And that kind of paralysis?
Yeah.
That's the classic opening for a strongman.
And here he comes. General Syed Barre. October 1969, the source describes a bloodless coup. And at first, people were okay with it.
Many actually welcomed it. And this is the part that's often forgotten. Barr didn't come in, twirling a villain mustache. He came in as a modernizer,
Preaching scientific socialism.
which was the flavor of the month in the late 60s, early 70s.
It really was. He aligned with the Soviet Union, but he also did some genuinely impressive things early on. He launched massive literacy campaigns.
They actually standardized the written Somali language for the first time.
Right. They did. He built roads. He promoted women's rights in a way that was, frankly, very progressive for the region. There was this honeymoon period.
A feeling of, okay, the chaos is over. Now we're building a nation.
Right. But central to this whole building a nation idea was his war on the clan system. The source mentions he even held a mock funeral for it.
Yes, this is just wild. He literally staged a burial for tribalism.
Yeah.
Buried a dummy to symbolize that the old ways were dead.
And the slogan was, "Comrade, not Klansman." He suspended the Constitution, banned political parties, and basically said, "We are all Somalis now."
Which sounds great on paper.
Yeah.
Let's stop fighting over family lines. But this is where we get to the twisted, fatal irony of his whole regime. Because while he was publicly burying tribalism privately,
He was doing something very, very different. This is the fatal hypocrisy. While he's preaching unity, Barr is terrified of losing power.
of course.
So he starts centralizing trust within a very specific circle. The source calls it the MOD Alliance.
I saw that in the notes. MOD, what does that break down to?
It stands for Marahan, Ogaden, and Dulbahante.
Okay, and those are...
The Marahan was his own clan. The Ogaden was his mother's clan. And the Dulbahante was his son-in-law's clan.
Wait, so the guy who banned clans basically turned the entire government into a family business.
It was a survival strategy disguised as a government. He filled all the top military and intelligence spots with people from these three groups.
Because he knew they'd be loyal to him personally.
But think about the math there. Somalia has these other huge major clans. The Isaac in the north, the Hawaii in the south.
And they're definitely not in the MOD club.
Completely shut out. So you have a state that's preaching we are one, but on the ground, the reality is if you aren't MOD, you don't get the government contract, you don't get the promotion.
And eventually you become the target.
That's it. And if the clan is your insurance policy, like we said, Barr is basically tearing up your policy while secretly upgrading his own.
That is a perfect way to put it. He was weaponizing the very thing he claimed to be destroying.
And that just breeds this deep, festering resentment. You can only keep the lid on that kind of pressure cooker for so long.
But for a while, he felt secure because he was playing the global game pretty well.
Right, the geopolitics. This is where the story goes from a domestic dictatorship to a full-on Cold War thriller.
He had the Soviets in his corner, so he had the tanks, the MiGs, the KGB, training his intelligence service. He built one of the biggest armies in Africa.
He had, and that military strength, it fed his ego. It led him to believe he could achieve this dream that Somalis had held for generations.
Which brings us to the flag. I never knew this until I read the source, but the Somali flag, the white star on the blue background, has 5 points.
And they're not just for decoration.
No, they're a map.
They are a map. The 5 points represent the 5 regions where ethnic Somalis live. 2 were in the new Somali Republic, but the other 3.
One was Djibouti, one in Kenya, and the big one.
The big one was the Ogaden region of Ethiopia.
So the very symbol of the nation is a claim. It's saying, we aren't complete yet.
Exactly. And in 1977, Barr looks across the border. Ethiopia is in total chaos. They've just had their own revolution.
The emperor's been overthrown.
Right. So Barr thinks this is it. This is destiny. And he invades Ethiopia to reclaim the Ogaden.
And at first, it works. They just sweep in, capture huge amounts of territory.
The Somali population there welcomes them as liberators. Barr looks like a military genius.
But then comes one of the most cynical, just fascinating plot twists of the entire Cold War.
The Soviet pivot.
Yeah.
See, the Soviets were in a real bind. They were funding Somalia. But the new government in Ethiopia was a Marxist military junta, the Derg.
So suddenly Moscow has 2 of its client states fighting each other.
It's like your 2 kids get into a fist fight. You have to pick one.
And the Kremlin did the math.
They did. They looked at Ethiopia. It's bigger, more populous, more strategic for controlling the Red Sea. And they decided Ethiopia was the bigger prize.
So they just ghosted Barr.
Oh, it was worse than that. They actively switched sides. They started airlifting massive amounts of weapons to Ethiopia. They even flew in 15,000 Cuban combat troops.
Wow. So Barr is sitting in his tank, thinking he's fighting a weakened Ethiopia, and suddenly he's staring down the barrel of the very superpower that built his army.
It was an absolute slaughter. The Somali army was crushed. They were forced into this humiliating retreat back across the border.
And the fallout from this defeat, you really can't overstate how devastating this was.
It wasn't just a lost battle. It broke the spell.
How so?
Dictatorships rely on this projection of strength, of invincibility. When that army came limping back, Barr looked weak. The economy was destroyed by the war effort.
And the country gets flooded with refugees from the Ogaden.
Hundreds of thousands of them. So now you have economic collapse, military humiliation, and a massive refugee crisis.
And remember that pressure cooker of clan resentment?
It's about to blow.
The Isaac, the Hawaii, all the groups had been pushed aside. Now they're looking at a broke, humiliated dictator and thinking, why are we putting up with this guy?
The fear was gone. And this is when the unraveling truly accelerates. We see the birth of armed resistance.
But, and this is so key, it didn't form as some kind of national pro-democracy movement?
No, it went right back to the clans.
Of course.
The Somali National Movement, the SNM, formed in the north. That was the Isaac. The United Somali Congress, the USC in the south, that was the Hawaii.
So Barr's whole anti-clan project failed so hard that the opposition organized itself strictly along the very lines he tried to erase.
Exactly. And Barr's response wasn't to negotiate or try to bring them back in. He just went scorched earth.
We're talking about state terrorism now.
Absolutely. The source details the events of the late 80s, particularly in the north, in Hargeisa. The regime basically decided that the entire Isaac clan was the enemy.
There is one detail in the notes that really stuck with me. The bombing of Hargeisa.
Yeah.
We're not talking about shelling from a distance.
No. The Somali Air Force pilots, flying planes, bought with national money, took off from the airport in Hargeisa, circled around, and bombed the residential neighborhoods of the exact same city.
They were bombing their own citizens' living rooms.
That is the psychological breaking point. How do you ever call yourself a government again after you strafe your own people?
You don't. That was the suicide of the Somali state. It shattered the social contract forever.
The legitimacy was gone. It was just a war for survival now.
And the rebels fought back with everything they had. By January 1991, the USC rebels, the Hawaii group, they have the capital, Mogadishu, surrounded.
Barr sees the writing on the wall. He packs up what he can and flees the capital in a tank convoy.
Okay, so in a movie, this is the victory scene. The dictator is gone. The statue comes down. Cue the music.
But in reality, this is where the title of our deep dive, State Failure, really truly happens.
This is the tragedy of the void.
The rebels had a common enemy, Barr. But they had absolutely no plan, no agreement for what came next.
I like the analogy you used when we were prepping, the rope.
Right. Imagine 3 people pulling on a rope to bring down a statue. They are working together perfectly, but the second that statue falls, they realize they all want to be the one to stand on the pedestal.
The unity was negative. It was against something, not for something.
Precisely. So the moment Barr leaves, the shooting doesn't stop.
It actually gets worse.
Much worse. The rebel groups turn on each other instantly. The USC splits into factions. And Mogadishu just gets torn apart.
The source describes a total collapse. And it's hard to wrap your head around what that means. It's not just a government shutdown.
No, it's the disappearance of everything. The police disbanded, the courts closed, the ministries were abandoned.
But it went deeper than that, didn't it?
Oh, yeah. The National Archives were burned. The copper wiring was ripped out of the walls of public buildings and sold for scrap metal.
The state didn't just fall, it was cannibalized.
It ceased to exist. And in its place, you got warlordism, strongmen carving up neighborhoods, setting up roadblocks, taxing anyone who tried to pass.
And this leads us to the human cost. The famine of 1991, 1992. The numbers are just staggering, hundreds of thousands dead.
And the source makes a really disturbing point. This wasn't just because the rain didn't fall.
No, this was a man-made famine.
Food became the ultimate weapon. If you control the food aid, you control the population. Warlords were deliberately starving out rival clan territories to weaken them. They were hijacking relief trucks.
That's horrific. And those images, the starving children, the skeletal figures, that's what finally shamed the international community into acting.
Right, which brings us to the U.S. and UN intervention. Operation Restore Hope.
A noble mission.
Yeah.
Go in, secure the food roost, stop the starvation.
But they were walking into a meat grinder they did not understand.
They thought they were referees in a humanitarian crisis.
But the warlords saw them as just another rival militia. And when the U.S. forces tried to arrest one of the key warlords, General Aid, it led directly to the Battle of Mogadishu.
Black Hawk Down.
18 American soldiers killed. 2 helicopters shot down, and the footage of bodies being dragged through the streets.
That changed everything.
It ended the world's willingness to intervene. The U.S. pulled out. The UN pulled out shortly after. And the message sent to the world was, Somalia is ungovernable. Wall it off. Look away.
And we did look away for a long time. But the source points out you can't really wall off chaos. It just mutates.
Exactly. The long shadow of that collapse is what we've been dealing with for the last 2 decades. When you have no Coast Guard, foreign ships come and dump toxic waste or overfish.
So local fishermen arm themselves, and you get piracy.
Which became a massive global crisis in the 2000s. And when you have no rule of law and a generation of young men who've known nothing but war, you create a vacuum for extremism.
The rise of al-Shabaab.
It's a direct descendant of this state failure. They offered a brutal, terrifying form of order in a place that had none.
It's a cascading failure. A corrupt dictatorship, a disastrous war, a total collapse, and the echoes are still ringing today.
And I think that's the so what here. We tend to look at Somalia and just see chaos or danger. But if we look closer, we see a warning.
A warning about what happens when a state stops serving its people and starts serving only itself.
Yeah.
And it creates this nearly impossible challenge for the future.
I mean, imagine you're trying to rebuild in Mogadishu today. The archives are gone, the property records are gone, the trust is gone.
That's the most provocative thought for me. How do you rebuild a nation from year zero?
It's not just about pouring concrete. It's about psychological reconstruction. How do you convince someone to trust the state again when their memory of the state is a fighter jet bombing their house?
That is a massive, massive question. It requires a level of resilience that's honestly hard to fathom.
It does. And the fact that Somalia is still there, that people are rebuilding, that the diaspora is returning, it is a testament to that resilience. But the scar of that collapse is incredibly deep.
Well, on that heavy but important note, we're going to wrap up this deep dive. It's a tough history, but one that really does explain so much about the world we live in today. Thanks for helping us unpack it.
My pleasure.
And thank you for listening. We'll catch you on the next one. Okay, so